I didn't know she was a tyrant when I signed the contract. If I had, I might have still taken the job, but I would have packed a lot more carefully and maybe written a will. The message arrived on my terminal at 3 in the morning, encrypted and stamped with a priority code I'd only ever seen in academic case studies. It wasn't a request. It was an offer wrapped in inevitability. Position: interstellar linguistic liaison. Duration: indefinite. Location: classified. Compensation: more than I'd earned in my entire life. At the bottom, in smaller text, it read, "Your unique cognitive pattern and neural imprint have been identified as statistically optimal. Refusal is discouraged." That should have been my first clue. I was a translator by trade, not the casual kind who bounced between tourist dialects, but a specialist in first-contact linguistics. I studied how meaning survived the jump between species that didn't share biology, culture, or even time perception. I was good at it. Too good, apparently. Within 24 hours, a silent black transport lifted me from Earth. No farewell. No explanation. Just acceleration, so smooth it made my bones hum. The crew didn't speak to me. They didn't need to. Every surface of the ship whispered authority, from the matte obsidian walls to the way doors opened half a second before I reached them, as if anticipating obedience. On the third day, or what I assumed was the third, time felt elastic. I was escorted into a chamber that looked more like a throne room than a briefing hall. That was when I met her. She sat at the far end, elevated on a crescent platform of living metal that shifted subtly beneath her weight. The air around her shimmered, not with heat, but with pressure, as if reality itself leaned inward to listen. She was tall, taller than any human, slender, but not fragile. Her skin was a deep, iridescent violet, patterned with faint, luminous veins that pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat written across her body. Her eyes were gold, too gold, reflective in a way that suggested they saw more than surfaces. And she was smiling, not cruelly, not kindly, knowingly. "This," one of the aides announced, voice trembling despite obvious conditioning, "is her sovereign continuance, supreme arbiter of the Varelian dominion. The tyrant." She leaned forward slightly, resting her chin on long, elegant fingers. Her gaze locked onto mine, bypassing the entire room like I was the only object that existed. And then she winked. A deliberate, unmistakable wink. I almost forgot to breathe. "Human," she said, her voice layered, multiple tonal ranges harmonizing into something that vibrated directly in my chest. "You may call me Empress Kael." My translator implant lagged for half a second, struggling to reconcile the linguistic density of her words. When it caught up, I realized something unsettling. She wasn't speaking through the implant.
She was speaking to me.
"I am told you hear meaning where others hear noise," she continued. "Is that true?" "Yes," I said, throat dry. "Your Majesty." Another wink. "Oh, I think we'll get along," she said. That was how it began. My job, as it turned out, was to translate during negotiations between the Varelian Dominion and a coalition of fringe systems that had resisted annexation for nearly a century. Officially, I was there to prevent misunderstandings. Unofficially, I was a buffer, someone soft enough to absorb the cultural shock of Kaelith's presence. She ruled over thousands of worlds. Her policies were efficient, uncompromising, and devastatingly effective. Rebellion rates dropped to near zero wherever her influence settled. So did population growth, artistic expression, and any illusion of autonomy. That was why they called her a tyrant, and why she needed me. Kaelith understood languages perfectly. What she didn't understand, what fascinated her, was hesitation.
Doubt.
the subtle emotional static humans carried in every sentence. "You pause before truths," she observed one evening after dismissing her court early. "Why?" "Because words can hurt," I said carefully. She tilted her head. "Pain is instructive." "Yes," I replied, "but so is trust." She considered that. Then she smiled again and winked. She did it often, during council sessions, during executions broadcast across the Dominion, during moments when no one else dared meet her eyes. Each time, it felt like a secret. The more time I spent translating for her, the more I realized something unsettling. She wasn't flirting out of whimsy. She was studying me. I began to notice the way her questions shifted depending on my tone, how she altered her posture when I hesitated, how her gaze lingered just long enough to unbalance me before moving on. "You do not fear me," she said one night, as we reviewed transcripts from a failed negotiation that had ended in orbital bombardment. "I do," I admitted. "I just don't let fear decide my grammar." That earned me a laugh, an actual laugh, rich and resonant, echoing through the chamber like music that hadn't been played in centuries. "You are dangerous," she said softly. "I translate," I replied. "I don't command fleets." She stood then, descending from her platform until she was close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "You command me," she said, "in ways you do not yet understand." Her hand lifted, stopping just short of my face. "Not touching. Never touching." Then she winked again and turned away. That night, I couldn't sleep. The middle of my assignment was where things became complicated. The coalition leaders began to notice that Kael's tone softened when I spoke, that her decrees shifted subtly after private consultations, that exterminations became relocations, that punishments became probationary compliance. Rumors spread. They called me the human filter. Some accused me of manipulation, others of treason. A few desperate worlds began requesting me specifically, believing my presence increased their chances of survival. Kael noticed everything. "You are altering outcomes," she said during a closed session. "Explain." "I translate intent," I said. "Sometimes that changes results." Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus. "You believe my rule can be gentler." "I believe it can be understood," I replied. "And understanding reduces resistance." She studied me for a long time. Then she dismissed everyone except me. "You are aware," she said quietly, "that my kind does not wink." I suspected as much. "It is a learned gesture," she continued, "from human media, a signal of selective attention." My pulse quickened. "Why is it with me?" I asked. Her answer was immediate. "Because you see me as a person," she said, "not an inevitability." The room felt smaller. "I was not always this," she went on. "I was made into it, conditioned, enhanced, isolated. Tyranny is not a desire, it is a function." I didn't know what to say, so I translated her silence instead. "You're lonely," I said. She didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped closer and, just for a moment, rested her forehead against mine. A gesture no one else in the Dominion had ever seen. "If I stopped ruling tomorrow," she whispered, "they would tear the galaxy apart in my absence." I believed her, and that terrified me. The crisis came suddenly. A core world revolted, not with weapons, but with language. They broadcast a manifesto written in a hybrid dialect so complex that no machine could parse it. A cultural virus designed to fracture meaning itself. Kael couldn't interpret it. For the first time, she needed me not as a translator, but as a shield. As the manifesto spread, systems began to miscommunicate. Orders contradicted themselves. Fleets hesitated. The Dominion's greatest strength, absolute clarity, began to collapse. "Fix it," Kael commanded. I tried. But the manifesto wasn't meant to be translated. It was meant to feel. "It's grief," I told her. "Encoded grief. They're forcing everyone to experience the cost of obedience." Her jaw tightened. "They weaponized empathy." "Yes," I said. "And it's working." For the first time since I'd met her, Kael looked afraid. "If this continues," she said, "the Dominion will fracture. Billions will die." "There's another option," I said quietly.
She turned to me.
"Abdicate," I said. "Let the systems govern themselves, with oversight, not domination." Silence. Her hands clenched. "They will fail," she said. "They always do." "Maybe," I replied, "but they'll fail honestly." She stared at me, golden eyes searching. Then she smiled.
And didn't wink.
Instead, she bowed.
To me.
"I will leave," she said, "before they destroy themselves trying to define me." "What?" My voice broke. "Where will you go?" "Beyond the mapped galaxy," she said, "where my presence cannot distort choice." The room spun. "And the Dominion?" "I will seed it with your translations," she said. "Your philosophy. Your hesitations." I laughed weakly. "That sounds dangerous." She stepped close one last time. "You taught me that danger can be gentle," she said. Then, finally, she winked. The day she left, the galaxy didn't end. The Dominion fractured, but slowly.
Carefully.
Worlds argued.
Failed.
Recovered. Languages evolved. I stayed. I became something else. Not a translator for a tyrant, but a historian for a civilization learning how to speak without fear. Sometimes, late at night, I receive faint signals from beyond the galactic rim. Not words, just patterns. Meaning without language. And every so often in the static, there's a rhythm that feels familiar. Like a wink, traveling faster than light. Kael's departure was not announced with ceremony. There was no final address to the Dominion, no broadcast of last commands, no threat or promise carved into history. The Empress who had ruled 1,000 worlds simply vanished. Her flagship slipped beyond the galactic boundary at sublight speed, deliberately slow, as if giving the universe time to notice she was leaving. The navigational charts recorded her destination as null space, a region so empty that even meaning had trouble surviving there. When the signal went dark, something strange happened. Nothing exploded. No fleets defected overnight. No planets burned in celebration or rebellion. The Dominion didn't collapse in fire the way everyone had always predicted it would. Instead, the galaxy hesitated. Orders went unanswered for minutes. Councils delayed votes. Military commanders waited for confirmations that never came. For the first time in generations, the machinery of absolute rule encountered silence and didn't know how to translate it. That silence was my inheritance. They asked me to speak for her. I refused. I was never her voice, I told the High Conclave. I was the space between words. If you want a future, you'll have to learn how to speak to each other. They didn't like that answer. But without Kael, they didn't know how to punish it either. So they listened. The first year was chaos disguised as optimism. Worlds that had relied on imperial efficiency struggled with decision-making. Some systems fractured into smaller alliances. Others attempted to resurrect fragments of Kael's authority, hoping fear would organize them again. It didn't. Fear without Kael was just noise. I traveled constantly, not as an official, but as a witness. I translated treaties written by committees who argued over commas for months. I mediated conflicts where both sides were technically correct and emotionally exhausted. I watched civilizations fail publicly, and then try again, a little wiser. Sometimes I hated her for leaving. Sometimes I understood exactly why she had. At night, when I was alone, I replayed our last conversation over and over. Not the words, but the pauses between them. The moment she bowed. The way she didn't wink at the end because she didn't need to. She had already said goodbye. 5 years after her departure, I received the first signal. It didn't come through official channels. No encryption keys. No identifiable origin point. It arrived the way a memory does, sudden, quiet, undeniable. A pattern, not language, not sound. A pulse of meaning. I felt it before I understood it, like an old emotional reflex waking up. The signal wasn't asking to be translated. It was asking to be recognized. I sat alone in my quarters and closed my eyes. "Hello, Kael," I whispered, feeling ridiculous and certain at the same time. The pattern shifted. Confirmation.
She didn't speak.
She couldn't, not the way we once had. Whatever space she had gone to strip symbols down to their essence. Words didn't survive there, but intent did. She showed me fragments of her existence, drifting between galaxies like a thought that refused to settle, observing civilizations that never knew she existed, learning how to be without commanding anything at all. There was loneliness there, but also relief. I sent something back, not words, but context. Images of the Dominion's slow, painful growth. Of worlds learning to argue instead of obey. Of children studying history that no longer ended with her name written in inevitability. The signal lingered longer than before. Approval. Then something unexpected. Gratitude. Years passed. The Dominion became something unrecognizable to its former self. Messier.
Slower.
More alive. They never rebuilt the throne. No one dared. As for me, I stopped being the human who translated for a tyrant. I became the one who reminded people that power was not a language, it was a choice. And sometimes, late in the quiet hours between stars, I would feel it again. That familiar pressure. That knowing presence brushing against the edge of thought. A pause. A flicker of warmth. Not a wink, not anymore. Something gentler, like a smile, finally meant for no one else but me. And somewhere beyond the galaxy, a former tyrant continued learning how to exist in a universe that no longer needed her to rule it, only to understand it.